He'd let the drone charge a bit and then send it off for a follow-up, specifically to anything interesting it might have spotted. With the push of a button, off the drone went to go map areas it hadn't mapped yet, but in a wider pattern to spread out how much it could get done on a single charge. With the drone buzzing off, Rico threw his worker gloves back on and grabbed his shovel. After shuffling off the plywood from his new watering hole, he admired the sparkling clear water, reflecting a cowboy hat back at him. Well, he wasn't a cowboy yet. He dug through his cargo pocket and pulled out his cowboy hat and posed for the water pit he'd successfully made. Then pulled his neckerchief up to get to work. Rico looked at the hole, then looked back to where the house was, looked at the water hole in the direction of the house. He imagined where it was, and then realized the bike marks he was making were a good enough path to follow. Rico thought for a second and realized the shovel wasn't going to work, and stabbed it back in the dirt, and then jumped on it for good measure, his military boots stomping into the shovel sturdily. Rico looked around for a second before finding his pickaxe tossed aside, a bush slowly turning green, trying to reclaim it. "Mine!" Rico exclaimed as he wrestled the mattock from the sagebrush. It seemed to give him a look as if it was finders keepers and that the bush was smarter than he was. Rico squinted judgmentally back at the clump of grangly grass with a humph. Straddling in the impromptu bike lane Rico had been making, he started carving away at the dirt little by little, not connecting it with his watering hole until it was done. As he smashed, picked, and pulled away at the dirt, trying to take the most direct approach, he wondered how long it was to his ancient artifact fossil of a garden. As he chipped away a foot at a time, he thought maybe it was a quarter of a mile. He lost track of time every time he traveled from point A to point B, but wasn't sure why. Chipping away 1 foot of earth led to 10 and eventually 20. He tried to do a straight line as best as he could. It was only maybe a few inches deep, but he could always do more later once he was sure the water wouldn't take on a mind of its own. Eventually he couldn't see his bike very well anymore, or the shovel, and turned around to look towards his house. He could sort of imagine where it was, and saw now the multiple timed bike tire treads heading that basic direction. He dug away a few more feet of earth, then decided it was time to stop for water and some more of his breakfast chow. There was enough left for a few more mouthfuls when he got bumped into from behind. He hadn't really heard anything that sounded like footprints, but thought he imagined some gravel grinding. When he spun around, there was nobody there, then looked down. A tire wanted to cross the ditch he was making. Rico moved out of the way, and the tire resumed its travel, and Rico shrugged. He'd have to figure out a little bridge or something so the tires could roll over his ditch he was making so they wouldn't get upset. The last thing he needed was a bunch of pissed-off tires unable to get to where they needed to go. Rico finished off his water and crumpled the bottle back into his pocket and then began digging again. In the distance, a tire was going the other direction and was having fun hopping over the ditch like it was a new game to play. Rico didn't even bother looking up at the tires anymore. They were going to do whatever they were going to do. He saw the off-road tire playing in his peripheral, but just ignored it, as long as the tires were happy. Pick, pick, pick. Rico picked away at the ground foot by foot, until he felt like he was about at the halfway mark, and then decided it was a good time to get his motorbike in case he needed it for any emergency-type reason. He trotted along his little ditch he'd been digging step after step until he could see the shovel and his bike in the distance. Somewhere behind him, a tire hit the ditch at full speed and went flying, getting tons of air. Rico shook his head, kept walking, finding little spots to pick out where there was a rock or a root ball partially in the way. Eventually he got back to his watering hole and sat down for lunch. Rico started snacking on his lunch mix and wishing he had more water to drink. He looked in his watering hole and it looked clear enough. Rico kneeled over and swished the water around for a little bit. It was crystal clear. Not that he could see microscopic parasites or anything, but It looked like clear mountain water. It even smelled clean. Rico shrugged and filled up his water bottle. What's the worst thing that could go wrong? As if someone from above would smite him for challenging fate. He looked around to see if there was a deer that was snickering from just pooping in his water hole. There was no such deer, thankfully. In fact, he looked around and there wasn't really any animals at all. He knew where he could reliably see life, though, and looked up. There were the buzzards that followed him around all day, waiting for him. Not today, buzzards! He shook his fist at them, but on the inside he was glad that they were there. Without them, there'd be no signs of life anywhere around here. Where had all the life gone? He wondered. A thought slowly phased in, but he couldn't grasp it. It was repeating two diametrically opposed poles, two extremes. He felt pulled in either direction, but was stuck in the middle. And then a word flowed through the fog. Chapter 13, Purgatory. Rico shrugged the thought away before it could maintain a foothold. He wouldn't give up fighting. Plus, he was having too much fun. Sure, there was adversity, but it wasn't too bad. There seemed to be a grand design. This Joe guy that kept mailing him stuff seemed to have everything planned out. That meant there must still be a plan. As long as there was a plan, Rico wouldn't give up, even in this apparent wasteland. So he munched on his lunch blend of crackers and various rice cereals, all salty instead of savory, just the way he liked it. Peppered throughout there were miniature chocolate candies and roasted peanuts. Everything a growing boy needed to work throughout the day. The salt pained his mouth at first, but then started making it feel even better. Another gulp of water, and it was time for a refill in his makeshift well. At this rate, he could finish the first iteration at his ditch before sundown. Then he realized he felt like he was missing something, forgetting something. Rico looked around and saw his little beehive-style backpack on the ground with the drone inside nearly back at full charge. A solar panel on top gathering sunlight as an auxiliary to the standard charging port. Finishing up his lunch snack, Rico pulled up his phone to see what all had been mapped. It was as he suspected. Everything around him was barren, and this was the only spot that had a high chance for water. Indifferent to the whole situation, having nothing real to go on, Rico sent the drone out again, towards the ridgeline. The drone had stopped only just before the ridgeline, and Rico figured it couldn't hurt anything. The parameters for the drone range allowed it to be set at a cone where it could record the ridge and make it back, as long as there was no real wind issues or anything. Rico looked around and didn't see any wind, so he figured good enough as far as he could control. With the push of a few buttons, the drone popped back out and headed towards the ridge with its new orders. A warning across the screen that it wasn't actually at full charge was missed, as Rico put the phone away before the calculations had completed and notification displayed. Without another thought, Rico hopped on his motorbike with his jacket and helmet on and putted back to the end of his ditch. He would pedal later. He wanted to save his energy for the remainder of the day's work to be done. He pickaxed away for what seemed like hours, and probably was. Upon having his modest homestead in view, it renewed his energy, and he finished the path to his desolate garden with vigor. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he refilled his water bottle and then set to head back to the watering hole to finish the last little notch that would stream the water down to the homestead overnight for him to work on in the morning. It sparked a thought really fast, though, and he dug an impromptu pit really fast with the pickaxe and filled it with all the loose gravel he could find. Later he would try to dig a deeper hole or make a fish pond or something. He wasn't exactly sure. Of course, there was no actual fish for him to make a pond for, but oh well. It was the thought that counted, right? He looked towards the house and saw it was an incline so the water wouldn't flood his house or anything. Rico nodded in satisfaction that it worked out as well as it did. With analysis and work complete, Rico hopped back onto his motorbike and half under engine power and half pedaling to pass the time, scooted along the 2-mile stretch or whatever it was of empty ditch to his watering hole. Maybe it was closer to 1.5 miles. Rico couldn't remember. Upon returning to the watering hole, the sun was trying to set. He had maybe half an hour or so of daylight. He wasn't sure. Plenty of time. Rico reached down for his pickaxe and realized he'd left it at the house. That's okay. The shovel was still there. He shoveled, poked, and prodded away at the half foot of dirt and gravel until a little bit of a trickle gave way. Rico thought for a second and gave it a little more space to flow, and away it went. A tiny little stream, almost like the fuse being lit, if the fuse was water.